Pepperdine University, Graduate School of Education and Psychology, China Study, Emerging Challenges in Social Security, Healthcare, and Leadership, EDOL Preliminary Defense, March 21, 2018, Dr. Farzan Majidi Committee, ed. Chairperson Drive June Schmeider Ramirez, Ph.D. Dr. Lonnie Frazier, ed. Discussion Outline, Section 1. Introduction, Section 2. Chapter 1, Section 3. Chapter 2, Section 4. Chapter 3, Section 5. Firewall, Section 6. Conclusion. Introduction. China is poised to introduce sweeping innovation and disruptive social change onto their national stage. As China's leadership, economic power, and authority increase, the country will be subject to increasing internal and external challenges. This study seeks to identify the significant internal social challenges China is most likely to confront along its path to global leadership. Specifically, the purpose is to explore and discover the social challenges that are likely to face China and to predict the direction the country's leadership will take over the next decade. The study approaches the problem by undertaking an initial 9-step process of investigating 6 environmental categories as influencers or drivers of change. This approach utilizes Schmeider and Millet's Spell-It matrix model, Saldanha's theming and coding technique, and Turoff's real-time policy Delphi method to identify these influential environmental categories and factors. The study then focuses on examining cultural ideologies, leadership, and organizational behavior as they converge to influence China's social priorities. This study's design and approach places emphasis on developing an extensive background and investigation into China's historic, present, and future leadership ideologies as they are likely to drive the country's social security and healthcare reforms. As a means of identifying critical themes and determining a valid focus, the study combines complex algorithmic analysis with a relevant policy Delphi study to discover and confirm a set of valid policy reform predictions. This study is based on the assumption that China's future challenges will be shaped by the country's global growth, internal social environmental, transitioning ethnological, and intercultural ideologies as it shifts to a position of global superiority. This study's findings and recommendations are significant in the context of assisting leaders, scholars, and analysts frame a subsequent narrative toward shaping policy decisions by addressing China's present and future internal tensions due to a social security and healthcare crisis. Chapter 1, Shaping a Relevant Delphi Study. Statement of the problem. China's emerging social security and healthcare program crisis and leadership challenges. In short, the initial investigation into China's social reform and leadership challenges indicate that the country's desire for growth, transitioning ideology, and global dominance are factors that are significantly linked and significant to the country's success in addressing its desired social program innovations and leadership in the future. Statement of purpose. To explore and discover the leading leadership, health, and security program challenges that are likely to face China and to predict its direction and impact over the next decade. Overall, this study intends to investigate and provide findings that can assist scholars by increasing their knowledge and understanding of the areas covered from the worldview of East Asia, and by assisting to close the gap in the literature specific to China's near-term challenges facing its leadership, social security, healthcare system, and economy. Research hypothesis and objective study significance. 1. China will introduce a broader social security system to address to its aging population. RH1, 2. China will introduce a broader healthcare system to address its aging population. RH2, 3. A shift in China's leadership ideologies will cause the country to increase social security and healthcare reforms. RH3. Should China fail to manage the challenges identified in this study successfully in certain win-win ways, the potential negative implications to the people of China and the citizens of the world will be considerable. Study framework, Spell-It analysis model. This study applies a slight variation of Schmeider-Ramirez and Millet's Spell-It model in that each factor focuses on a set of diverse sub-influencers in each category. This framework is designed to accommodate investigations into social issues, factors, and implications so as to best fit any given research process or methodology. Study Framework, Spell-it Analysis Model. The model depicts the 6 categories or areas of interest this study initially focuses on in order to identify those areas that emerge as statistically significant. The categories include social, political, economic, legal, intercultural, and technology. Within each category, the initial literature investigation identified a series of subcategories or issues. As an example, the social category was found to be closely associated to population, geography, scale, stability, and unity. The political category was found to be associated to subcategories in the areas of natural resources and environmental protection, and so on. Background Country Brief, Zhangguo, China, a historical perspective. In order to gain a better perspective of this study's central problem and desired outcome, it is imperative to first closely examine, understand, and appreciate the complex nature of China's long history, traditions, cultural diversity and unique leadership characteristics. As a result, this study closely examines the following periods or epochs in China's history. 1. The initial Marxist period from 1920 to 1926. 2. The formative Maoist period from 1927 to 1935. 3. The mature Maoism period from 1935 to 1940. 4. The Civil War period from 1940 to 1949. 5. The post-1949 period following revolutionary victory. After a close examination of the referenced periods, the study turns its focus to investigating the country's shift of mind from Maoism to economic totalitarian policy. Further, shortly after Mao's death in 1976, the Deng Xiaoping era ushered in capitalist reforms that served to reshape the People's Republic of China between 1978 and 1989. What followed next was the emergence of the three-world theory, global leadership. The leadership of Deng Xiaoping. Finally, the leadership of Xi Jinping, the country's current president, is assessed in the context of his current national interests, desires, policies, future direction, and leadership characteristics. Study limitations, abound investigation. This limit establishes an investigation into China from the perspective of how certain emerging conditions will influence the people of China, her future policy, and the related implications these policies may have on the country's leadership, social security, and healthcare programs over the next decade. Limits its investigation into the nature of specific environmental factors as influencers or drivers of China specific to a set of focused categories or areas of interests. Limits its investigation to specific areas of interest as factors, sub-factors, categories, and subcategories as issue sets or themes that may influence and or drive China's leadership, social security, and healthcare reforms in the next decade. Summary key terms and definitions, provided at the back of Chapter 1. Additionally, supported in the appendices, the research codebook and varied definitions are located in various sections of the paper. Science cannot solve the ultimate mystery of nature, and that is because in the last analysis, we ourselves are a part of the mystery that we are trying to solve. Planck, 1949, father of quantum physics. Key assumptions. This paper's assessment of social reform and transitional leadership theming are in part based on the guiding philosophy and assumptions set forth in Smith's inquiry into the nature and the causes of the wealth, power, authority, and dominance among nations, labor, manufacturing power, commodities, tradable agriculture, and resources, Deng's social and economic ideological pragmatism, and Jared Diamond's environmental factors that are viewed as influencers on societal reforms and policy decision-making. Diamond argues the outcomes associated with these factors ultimately result in the success or failure of a nation. Key assumptions. The relevant factors that emerged from the initial examination of the problem statement in a historical context were population, social-political, intercultural, food supply, political-economic, wealth, political-economic, energy, economic, military, economic, power. Summary. After completing the initial examination of the literature from the historical perspective, it was discovered that China displays certain characteristics as a unified people and national power. The commonly reoccurring themes found were that the country is big and fast-growing, continues to be extremely unique and complex, desires to lead by exceptionalism, desires to lead the global community, demonstrates an ideology, authority, dominance, and stability that includes wealth, social security, health care, and leadership. Chapter 2, A Review of Relevant Literature. Napoleon called China a sleeping giant. Let him sleep, Napoleon said. If he wakes, he will shake the world. China has now awakened and is indeed shaking the world. Ellen Brown, 2009. The Nature of Literature Reviews. Introduction. The Literature Review explores and investigates relationships between the study's central hypotheses, the discovery of highly relevant themes, and construction of a series research questions that can be used as investigative tools, in this case to shape a series of valid predictive forecasts pertaining to China's emerging policy. Critical Literature, Review and Analysis. 1. Identifying incidents of commonly recurring themes and frequency distribution. 2. Identifying and applying incident frequency magnitudes, distribution, and significance to each theme. 3. Calculating and applying a cumulative weight coefficient to the data so as to adjust for longitudinal time bias and declining generational relevancy. 4. Applying Pearson's correlation analysis and coefficients to determine the strength of theme agreement. And 5. Applying a multiple nonlinear regression model and then integrating resultant findings or determinations into a multi-step decisional analysis algorithm, in the context of completing an in-depth and relevant literature review process, assessment, and determination of valid discoveries with ranked significance that support the construction of a series of relevant predictions. Selection of areas of interest, themes and categories. This study's literature review is limited to the 3 areas of interest as identified in this study's design process. Specifically, the literature focuses on social, political, and economic factors with specific attention given to the challenges and reforms China is facing in the areas of social security, health care, and leadership. Gaps and bias in the literature. The study focused on literature pertaining to the problem statement published prior to 2009, which represented approximately 40% of the materials assessed. 60% of the works examined were published after 2009. The opinions or findings represented in 65% of the publications reviewed were formulated by Western subject matter experts, while 35% of the publications favor an East Asian bias by statesmen, scholars, and researchers. Investigating the literature, high-frequency contributing literature, HFCL, reoccurring themes. Moreover, after conducting considerable research on the reform of China's social security, health care, and emergent leadership transitions, a shift in thinking and prevailing ideologies, the works selected for this study represent authors that are high-frequency contributors toward the literature on these topics as subject matter experts. Social environment. Investigating social security. Research hypothesis: China will introduce a broader social security system due to its aging population, RH1. The literature indicates influencers are present that represent ideological shifts towards social security reform are beginning to emerge. The Chinese people's acceptance of the CPC's suggested policy changes also indicate the country is shifting away from traditional Maoist traits and doctrine. Cohen, 2001, specific to self-reliance. China's deeply rooted cultural and social traditions continue to significantly influence its people and leaders. These influences not only remain intact with China's aging community, but continue to serve as a cautionary guide to the emerging youth's perception of social security. Social environment. Investigating health care. Research hypothesis: China will introduce a broader healthcare system due to its aging population, RH2. Selichkev argues the loss of adequate healthcare support eventually leads to social instability. Faltering programs lead to a loss of employment and the necessity for families to cover medical expenses. The losses or reductions in these programs generates a ripple effect throughout a country's economy that serves to further reduce a country's general productivity, gross national product, gross domestic product, GDP, and relative wealth. Literature summary, Social Security and Healthcare Reforms, Key Points. Social and cultural ideologies, taxation and levies, independence and self-reliance, social and economic reforms, investment and infrastructure, inclusiveness, equitable balance and access. This study's literature review findings provide evidence China is still in need of substantial advancements in social security and health care. Leadership environment, investigating ideologies, research hypothesis, a shift in China's leadership ideologies will cause the country to increase social security and health care reforms, RH3. What can be gathered from the literature that characterizes what China's leadership will do to address the emerging social security and healthcare crisis due to its aging population? President Xi's choice of role models offers insight into his priorities as he addresses China's emerging challenges and future policies. These can be summarized in the context of the leadership characteristics, styles, and behaviors of China's emerging leaders. When collectively analyzed, they provide a degree of evidence that partially supports predicting China's future direction. Literature summary, Leadership transformation, key points, environmental factors, economic growth, risk-taking, ethics, exceptionalism, and superiority, leadership ethos, authority and legitimacy, government and social stability, experimentation, education and learning, unity and advancement, aged workforce, values and traditions, reduce social tensions, liberalization, Mao's Ritz, a gradual cultural and ideological shift to increased freedoms and wealth, superiority and growth, drivers of nationalism and exceptionalism, rule of law and legal system, global market integration and cooperation, change, innovation, advanced technologies, and integration, led in China unique technologies and products, exceptionalism. Literature summary, Leadership transformation, issues that need to be addressed, elements, opportunities, as observed from the literature. A number of leadership transformation issues were discovered that China will need to focus on in the future. In fact, 26 were identified as recurring themes. Of these, the ones which appear to be the most associated with the social security, health care, and leadership policy challenges are the following. Ensure uniform fairness, increase gender equality, increase mobility, social freedom and openness, increase education, science, and technology, increase economic liberalization and freedom, address intercultural, cultural, and ideological shifts, increase internal and external transportation, commerce and trade, increase resource independence, increase the emphasis on legal values and the rule of law, increase self-awareness, self-improvement, and confidence, maximize individual and team performance and effectiveness. Literature summary, Leadership strengths, leading themes and strength scores, characteristic styles. The scores range from 7 to 4, with 7 being the most predominant recurrent theme among a list of 34. The themes were evaluated by applying Dr. Clifton's Strength Finder 2.0 as a means of assessment. Dr. Donald O. Clifton, Tom Rath, Gallup, 2007. Strategic, 7. Competition, 6. Developer, 6. Maximizer, 5. Achiever, 4. Activator, 4. Adaptability, 4. Responsibility, 4. Self-assurance, 4. Although Chinese leadership is unique when viewed through the lens of the global community, it is well suited to Western models of analysis. The strengths listed summarize or define the country's national leadership characteristics or style or overall organizational behavior. Chapter 3, Delphi Study Methodology. Methodology, Overview and Introduction. Mixed method investigation into China by utilizing a common framework to investigate a series of relevant literature, themes, mapping and coding techniques, research questions or statement, and analytics, and to determine a set of findings necessary to design, construct, and implement a relevant Delphi policy study so as to determine a set of valid predictions pertaining to China's emerging social environment challenges and leadership decisions specific to Social Security, healthcare, and leadership policies. The Policy Delphi Method, an offspring of the classic Delphi method created by the Rand Corporation as the result of a U.S. Army Air Corps study commissioned during the Cold War in 1959. The approach, originally styled as a quantitative model, was designed by Olaf Helmer and Norman Dalkey, and Nicholas Rescher as a structured communication technique, originally developed as a systematic, interactive forecasting method which relies on a panel of experts. The objective of this Delphi study: the study seeks to identify the level of disagreement or absence of a clear-cut opinion or estimate from a panel as a means of determining whether a given issue or policy should cease in its consideration, advocacy, or continuation. Turoff, 2005. The objective is not to produce a consensus, but to expose the strongest arguments for and against possible resolutions of a policy issue that seeks a significant degree of agreement or disagreement. Slide 26. Applying controlling philosophy or theory and process. Turoff insists a controlling philosophy should be applied to the proposed inquiry system as a procedure to better assist in identifying valid outcomes. Turoff, 1975, pages 17 to 36. Lockean theory. In the context of applying Locke's philosophy to the Delphi policy process, Locke would likely argue all participants should approach the process with a tabula rasa, or a mental state that is not affected by prior experiences or impressions. Locke would likely argue participants should set aside personal bias, emotions, or behaviors in order to start with a clean slate so as to embrace a method of introspection when considering the full range of possibilities as they evaluate information when forming decisions. Baldwin, 1913. Hegelian theory. This dialectic philosophy provides an approach to the analysis of primary and secondary inquiries in the context of identifying the nature of factors, influencers, and drivers as a whole system. Gustav, 1996. By examining these from a worldview perspective, the approach offers the opportunity to identify factors of change that are supported by a higher reason and critical thinking, which include being open to considering opposing viewpoints that represent larger and more complex ideologies and competing interests. Applying the two underlying philosophies fundamentally increases this study's validity, depth, and examination of the problem statement, and overall purpose. Turoff and Mitroff argue that by applying the concepts of Hegel's dialectic theory, the process of addressing a thesis, antithesis, and synthesis are essential when seeking to achieve unique discoveries and predictive outcomes. Core inquiries and research statements, restated, A key STEM questions. Social themes. 1. Will China increase its social security system due to its aging population? 2. Will China increase its healthcare system due to its aging population? B. Key research hypotheses. Social themes. 1. China will increase its social security system due to its aging population. RH1. 2. China will increase its healthcare system due to its aging population. RH2. 3. China's geography has no association with its aging population. 4. China's present growth does not drive its future aging population. 5. China's present population is not driving its future social security programs. 6. China's present social security does not drive its future health care. See other questions. Social themes. 1. Will China redefine its people's freedoms and social balance to sustain its government's legitimacy? 2. Will China redefine its civil rights to increase social unity and political economic balance to sustain internal government legitimacy? 3. Is China's leadership behavior in conflict with its external leadership ideologies? 4. Are China's external leadership ideologies increasing power, authority, and superiority influencing the global political equilibrium? 5. Will China's changing internal leadership ideology and behavior continue to influence the liberalization of the Maoist cultural ideology? 6. Will China's leadership behavior focus on increasing natural resource access to sustain its growth? 7. Will China's external leadership ideology move it to increase its food supply to sustain growth? 8. Will China be confronted by a downturn in its economic growth trend? 9. Will China's economic and monetary ideologies be forced to transform to those of the West? 10. Will China improve its environment if it means reduced economic growth? 11. Will China enforce intellectual property law and protection to increase foreign investment if it means sacrificing China's economic growth? 12. Will China increase its citizens' right of ownership to sustain social economic growth? 13. Will China face its cultural stability issues if they challenge its current capital reserve and wealth? 14. Will China face technology advancement and military systems challenges to obtain superiority as a global power? D. Key research hypotheses. Leadership themes. 1. China's leadership will increase the country's social security and healthcare programs. RH3. 2. China's leadership focus on continued economic growth will limit increases in its social security programs. 3. China's leadership focus on continued economic growth will limit increases in its healthcare programs. 4. China's leadership will focus on addressing the imbalances between its social classes. 5. China's leadership will reform the country to demonstrate its ability to assume the role of being a new leader in the global community. Applied methodologies, principal techniques, processes, and methodologies were pertinent and a best fit for investigating the problem statement. The Spell-It Matrix Framework by June Schmider Ramirez and Leo Millet, the SWOT, PEST, Analysis by Albert Humphrey, Qualitative, Theme, Mapping and Coding Techniques by Johnny Saldana, the application of the Literature Review and Inquiry System, is, as developed by Mitroff, the application of the Policy Delphi method and rapid techniques by Murray Turoff, Olaf Helmer, T.J. Gordon, and Arthur Pease. IRB Plan, No Human Biological Testing, Endangerment, Mistreatment, Individual Risk, or the identification of any participant was involved in the course of conducting this study. Therefore, the study is compliant with the International Review Board standards. Definition of analysis, mixed method, concept, design, and approach overview. This 9-step process starts with an arduous investigation into the background of the topic as step 1. In this case, the step included an examination of China in the form of constructing a country brief. This step begins to shape the study's central issues. Once completed, the study moves to step 2, the problem statement assessment. Next, the study investigation moves to step 3, or focusing on the purpose of the investigation. Next comes step 4, which is when the initial null and research statements and/or questions begin to take shape. In this case, the study focuses on social, political, and economic categories of interest in the context of researching China's social security, healthcare, and leadership challenges, and their future direction. In step 5, these categories are researched and analyzed from the perspective of historical areas of interest, current areas of interest, future areas of interests, and from the viewpoint of 3 competitive ideologies, and 3 leading factors or issue sets. Step 6 assembles a collection of controlling assumptions that assist in shaping a series of null hypotheses. Step 7 identifies the commonly recurring themes or challenges that are observed in the categories defined as population, economic, food, energy, and military power. In Step 8, Turoff's IS or inquiry system is applied to better code, track and statistically assess predominant recurring themes. During this step, information is collected that allows a series of statements and/or inquiries to be constructed, which will later be integrated into the Delphi survey and findings process. Finally, Step 9 begins to sharpen or focus on constructing conclusions that can be gained from a close examination of the statistical outcomes as recurring themes in the literature after applying a series of arithmetic and statistical calculations and validity tests. Definition of data gathering procedures, Policy Delphi. A survey instrument design and process using an informal open-ended, face-to-face interview narrative collected from a closed sampling group. Survey participants included corporate executives, academic scholars, professors, doctorate students, and select Chinese nationals. The total sample, N equals 23, was stratified into functional area, topics, of interest as framed by the Spell-It model. Survey methodology. Targeted survey participants include corporate executives, academic scholars, professors, doctorate students, and select Chinese nationals. The total design sample was stratified into functional area, topics, of interest as framed by the Spell-It model. The Delphi study, a three-phase process within a six-step process, determine level of consensus, clarify inquiry and terms, resurvey items where consensus was not achieved. Validity and reliability. The research questions are highly relevant as they were constructed by applying Schneider and Millet's Spell-It framing model, Saldanha's theming and coding, frequency distribution by contributor, SFDC, Metroff's inquiry system, is methodically reducing the range of themes, variables, and potential outcomes, applying quantitative analytics, a series of arithmetic statistical calculations, longitudinal sample data framing, LSDF, analysis, incident frequency distribution, IFD, analysis, weighted and unweighted selection criteria, SC, analysis and ranking score analysis finding, RSAF, longitudinal bias, declining generational relevancy, DGR, high-frequency contributing literature reviews, HFCL, data distribution, quartile analysis, QA, data, Pearson correlation, PC, nonlinear regression, p-value, analysis, predictive theme outcomes, z-score analysis, standard deviation tests, sampling mean error analysis, social network analysis, SNA, R software, applied qualitative and quantitative techniques, codes, and arithmetic algorithm increase the ability to map and track critical observations, categories, factors, sub-factors, and issue sets, align and add clarity to the outcomes discovered, add another level of analysis and validation of the findings by offering the ability to compare the literature inferences to the Delphi findings. Validity and reliability. The research questions are highly relevant as they were constructed by applying Schneider and Millet's Spell-It framing model, Saldanha's theming and coding, Metroff's inquiry system, is methodically reducing the range of themes, variables, and potential outcomes, applying quantitative analytics, a series of arithmetic statistical calculations, statistical analysis and inferences, data correlations, Pearson, regression analysis, predictive theme outcomes, tests, sampling mean error, increase the ability to map and track critical observations, categories, factors, sub-factors, and issue sets, was enhanced by applying qualitative and quantitative techniques so as to align and add clarity to the outcomes discovered, increase the ability to compare the literature to the Delphi findings. Analysis observations, apply a relevant policy Delphi process, secure a critically relevant, significant, and valid discovery and/or finding, formulate the evidence to support a reasonable conclusion, ensure the investigation data and analytics are reproducible, the methodologies and analysis conform to appropriate academic and professional standards, the evidence, findings, and conclusions contribute to advancing the topic narrative and field of study. Firewall, why a firewall? Chapter 3 concludes the literature review process and opens the way for the Delphi process to begin. Specifically closes and separates the qualitative and quantitative investigation of the literature, the determination of theme statistical relevancy, the summarization of the key factors and influencers in the literature, the summarization of the analytics and findings, validates by statistical inferences the direction of the Delphi study and survey relevancy, validates the null and research statements to include key STEM questions as extracted from the literature analysis, serves to isolate the literature review and mixed method analytics from the Delphi process, survey, analytics, and findings. Conclusion. Establishes a firm foundation. Qualitative and quantitative investigations into the relevant literature have been completed. Key factors and influencers in the literature have been identified. The basis for a relevant Delphi study has been established. Isolate the literature review and mixed method analytics from the Delphi process, survey, analytics, and findings. Begin the Delphi process. Conduct a mixed method investigation. Identify key factors and influencers. Extract survey data and findings from SME surveys and interviews. Compare the literature to the SME survey findings. Summarize the comparative analytics. Shape findings, conclusions, and construct a set of valid predictions. 1. China will introduce a broader social security system to address to its aging population. RH1, 2. China will introduce a broader healthcare system to address its aging population. RH2, 3. A shift in China's leadership ideologies will cause the country to increase social security and healthcare reforms. RH3. The process opens the way to relevant discoveries, revelations and findings, and supports constructing reasonable predictions. Increases and enlightens dialogue. Increases understanding and appreciation for what appears to be important in the narrative. Increases preparedness for the future. And strives to contribute valued information, data, and discoveries to the research, academic and professional communities. This concludes the preliminary defense presentation on this topic. I wish to thank you for your time, attention, and consideration during this presentation. I look forward to answering any questions the committee may have pertaining to the information offered. In addition, I am excited about continuing the journey as, with your approval, I can move towards completing the Delphi survey and compilation process to determine the outcomes of the proposed research hypotheses.